So in today's quick video, we're going to paint this watermelon slice and explore a few techniques that will improve the texture and blending of your watercolor. So in order to get the watercolor effect, I'm using a paper texture and the regular brush kit. And to start painting, I'm going to choose a nice kind of watermelon red tone like that. For the brush, I'm going to use the hard edge brush because it has a nice texture on the edge of it. And at the largest size, and at a pretty firm pressure, I'm going to do a rough U shape here. So after I've done this first pass with a lot of pressure, I'm going to do a few more lines at a slightly different kind of varying pressures. And you can see it adds a really interesting kind of layered effect. Next, I'm going to grab the eraser brush and I'm going to set that to the fine liner pen. And I'm just going to carefully cut this out into a kind of watermelon shape. Now for the rind, I'm going to choose a pale green tone, and I'll use the same hard edge brush at a pretty large size, and I'll just do a line along the back. And after that, I'm going to do another line, but with a much darker and more saturated green tone. Now I'd like this area here to have a very nice and smooth transition, so I'm going to show you a cool blending trick. For that, I need the selection tool set to freehand. And I'm going to start and just go down the center of the darker part of the rind. Then I'm going to circle back, going through the kind of our red portion of the melon, reconnect it. Then I'm going to use the feather option here, and I'm going to feather it out just until that line reaches the edge of the rind. Then I can go to my adjustments, Gaussian blur, so I can just tap and drag here, and you can see it just blends and softens that area that we selected. There we go, now deselected. And of course, that's just an easy and quick way to get a smooth blend over a large area. Now the ends here did get a little bit fuzzy, so I'm going to cut those back with the eraser. Next, I want to soften some of these hard edges, so I'm going to change my brush to the water blender, the one at the very bottom here, and maybe around 10 or 20%. I'm going to go in there and soften this edge. And one trick that I recommend trying is, instead of doing back and forth like that, try to move in these kind of little half circle strokes like that and just move along the edge. And this can give it a really nice natural fade. And I really like how these areas kind of stand off. They're kind of like intentional flaws, and that's a big part of watercolor, so I'm going to leave those. Now this red portion here is very consistent. I'd like it to stay pretty saturated up here, but as it gets closer to the rind, I want it to fade a little bit. So again, I'm going to use the selection tool set to freehand, and I'm just going to make a U-shaped selection that covers that area. And I'll feather it out quite a bit. And normally if you want to lighten something, you might use the hue, saturation, and brightness. And sometimes that works, but there's a really interesting way to do it with the curves tool. Now, you can see there's a little blue dot down here. I'm just going to tap on that and drag it up. And you can see it brightens that area of the watermelon, but in a really even and balanced way when compared to the brightness slider. And I like this look a lot better. Next, I want to show you a way of adding texture that you might not have tried before. So I'm going to make a new layer above the watermelon, and I'm going to select pure white. For the brush, I'll go back to the hard edge brush that I was using before. And I'm basically just going to make a bunch of random blotches all over this. Now remember, this is on its own layer, so I can apply a Gaussian blur and basically smooth out the edges of those white blotches. And I think that looks pretty good. The effect is nice, but it's a little bit too strong. So I can lower the opacity of this layer and just set it to whatever strength I think looks good. Now I'm going to do it again, but this time with a different color. So I'll make a new layer above that, and I'll select a tone more similar to the watermelon color, and I'll do a similar process here. And again, this is on its own layer, so I can apply a Gaussian blur and soften it up. There we go. And I'll adjust the opacity. There we go. And then once you're happy with how all those layers are interacting, you can just pinch and merge them all together onto one. Next, I want to show you how to do the seeds. So they're going to be on their own layer above everything. I'll choose this kind of dark grayish red tone. For the brush, the hard edge one again, but at a much smaller size, maybe like 30%. And watermelon seeds are structured, so I'm going to try to follow a very light pattern like this. So I tried to limit the seeds to this kind of band, and also I tried to make a few of them really close together, kind of like parallel. This is something you see in watermelon seeds. And those seeds turned out pretty good, so I'm just going to merge them down with the watermelon. So again, everything is on one layer. And next, I want to show you how to add a really nice color variation. So the color here is pretty consistent. So if I grab the selection tool, set to freehand, and just select a random portion of that red area, I'll feather out that selection quite a bit. Then I can go to my hue, saturation, and brightness, and I can actually shift the hue of just that area. So I think I'll add a little bit of orange into it. There we go. And it's a subtle thing, but it makes it look more natural. I'm going to do the similar thing to the rind as well. And this time I'll shift the hue a little bit towards blue. Now the watermelon is looking really good, but I want to do one last trick and just add a very dark line to the edge of the rind. And to do that, I'm going to need the freehand selection tool again, just like that. And I'm going to make a selection that pretty closely follows the edge of the rind, but in a few places it's definitely going off into the white area. Then I'll circle back. Now if I use the hue, saturation, and brightness again, I can just darken those areas where I sort of accidentally went over the edge. And it adds a kind of natural, kind of abstract looking dark edge effect. And there we go. This simple watermelon illustration is all done. And here's the final result. And that pretty much wraps it up. If you think I've earned it, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks again for your support, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.